Welcome to Twin Talk Politics. Alright, hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Twin Talk Politics. And today we are so honored to be joined by MP Patrick Weiler, the Member of Parliament for the beautiful West Vancouver Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky country, and a very special interview for both Jason and I, not only because MP Weiler is an amazing MP that represents where we live, but more importantly, MP Weiler is one of the main reasons we actually started this podcast after volunteering at his amazing office for more than a year now, and seeing all the amazing things an MP does and how important youth voices are in politics. So a special shout out to not only MP Weiler but his phenomenal team. This episode has been a long time in the making, and we're really excited to talk to him about so many interesting things that Jason and I are so passionate about. But first, how are you doing today, MP Weiler?
Jerry, I'm doing great.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're finally able to do this, and it's just been such a pleasure to work with you guys for about a year now. And just so grateful to be working with you, and amazing to see the project that you're working on with the Twin Talks Politics.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So in tradition with our podcast, our first question is always a guessing question. And normally it's like, who do you think is Jason? Who do you think is Jerry? But obviously that question wouldn't work here because I was Jerry and he's Jason. Mm-hmm. So we kind of want to level it up to something a little bit more personal and something I'm really interested in because I know the answer is going to be me. But we know we played football a couple weeks back, and then Jason and I were both equally as bad. But I just wanted to know, from your professional opinion, who do you think was slightly better?
Well, I'm certainly not a professional in football, although I am a big football fan, and I did play high school football at Sentinel Secondary School. But I just say both you guys were, you as beginners, it was amazing to see how you picked it up as the day wore on, and it was interesting. First, I thought, one of the two of you was playing a little bit better. Jason was a little bit better, and then later Jerry was a little bit better. Yeah. So I think coming out of it, you guys really were able to pick it up quite quickly, and we'll have to throw around the pigskin.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Great. Now with that very important question out of the way, let's just jump straight into the interview. Now, Jerry and I know how amazing of a person you are, all the amazing initiatives and motions you've really passed. But for those who sort of don't know who you are, we were wondering if you could maybe give us a quick introduction, maybe your passions outside of politics and how you got really engaged and involved in politics in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I never really intended in getting into politics when I was younger. I've always been interested in government and policy because my mother was a municipal councillor in Sechelt. And she was a councillor and an environmental activist, and my father was a lawyer. So naturally, those are things that were really important influences on my life. And when I was in school, particularly university, I got really interested in the topic of sustainable development and how can we get our country and our world on a pathway to more sustainable development. So from there, I went to law school, had a big focus on environmental law, and then spent about 5 years working in international development.
Wow.
So I worked for the UN Development Program on projects focused on water, and that was just such an area that I was very interested in. And then I was living and working in Europe, and I wanted to come back to start practicing law. And I started working or articling at a law firm in North Vancouver, where the focus was on Aboriginal law.
Wow.
But particularly with my background focusing on environmental law cases, but working for Indigenous clients.
Oh, wow.
And very early on with my work there, I became frustrated with what I could do as a lawyer, because you get a chance to argue how the law should be interpreted, but you don't actually ever get to change how the law is written.
Yeah.
And to go through the process of changing the interpretation, you got to go through different levels of court, the Supreme Court, Court of Appeal, and then the Supreme Court of Canada, which sometimes takes a decade. So very early, I realized that if I wanted to make a difference in the areas that I cared about, particularly environmental law and Aboriginal law, if you could get involved, if I could get involved in working on legislation directly, it could be a much quicker way of making those changes. And I was working at the time of the Conservative Party was in power with Stephen Harper, and what they did to environmental law really gutted it. And so what I decided to do, like you guys, I did some work with an MP office. I worked with Jonathan Wilkinson back in 2015 and early 2016. And kind of got my foot in the door to what this work is all about. And I got interested in doing more. And it just happened that my predecessor, Pam Goldsmith-Jones, decided she wasn't going to run in 2019. And so she reached out and asked if I'd be interested. And, one thing led to another, and decided to run for the nomination. And, now almost 5 years later, haven't looked back. And what's really amazing now is the kind of things that I used to, read about on the news or, working at Jonathan's office, or the kind of things I'd be working on, litigation cases, are now things I get to look at it from the other point of view, from the government point of view, and how can we change the legal frameworks that are in place, and how can we make significant advancements in those areas. And so for me, that's been a really amazing kind of policy level work to do this, and it's, for me, it's kind of a dream come true, because that's why I got into this work in the first place.
Wow. Yeah, wow, that's really cool to hear your perspective and how you got into politics in the first place. Our second question is going to be twofold, and firstly, we were just wondering, and we wanted to get your opinion on what you think are the biggest problems for youth in Canada as a whole, so on a very macro level, and then on a more micro level, what do you think are the biggest problems for youth in our own constituency?
So I'd say the biggest challenge that youth face in Canada today is the same actually in our riding. I think our riding, our constituency, just has amplified it in many ways. So I think the biggest one is on housing. So we've got a major housing crisis in Canada. We need to build millions more homes over the next 7 years. Over 3.8 million homes is what we need to build in that time period, just to deal with the supply gap that we have right now. And we are essentially going to have to double the pace of home building that we have right now to meet the demand that we have in Canada. Because when the gap is where it is right now, it's just pushing up the cost of housing. And it's one thing if you're already in the market, you have housing, you're experiencing the growth in prices. But if you're a young person wanting to get into the market, it's getting further and further out of reach. So I'd say this is the biggest challenge that we have as a country. We've brought in a suite of measures to really address this, to work with municipalities to speed it up, to build more affordable housing, and to deal with a lot of the barriers that are in place right now. But the challenge is there was about 30 years the federal government did nothing about housing. So we're very much playing catch up right now. So I'd say that's one of the biggest challenges, and it's really amplified in our riding because the cost of housing, particularly West Vancouver and Whistler, is probably the two most expensive municipalities in the entire country. So it's really amplified in that respect. And I think the other thing is the labor market is changing so significantly in Canada right now. And I think there's really two big transformations that we're seeing. Canada has long been a natural resource-based economy, whether that's forestry, oil and gas, or otherwise. That's always been such a key part of our economy. But particularly energy systems are changing. We're moving towards more renewable energy. The demand for oil and gas is going to be going down over time. And so there's going to be a change in demand for those products, but we also see massive growth in the clean tech economy, where there's going to be huge demand there. And I think so there's going to be a change in the opportunities that are there for young people. But if people have the right training and skills in place, that's going to be the biggest economic opportunity for young people. And the other thing is the changes that are happening with the digitization. So particularly artificial intelligence, it's completely changing so many different jobs that are out there, such that for people that understand how to use AI, they can get their productivity is so much greater. But there's going to be some jobs that are going to be a little bit less in demand, or need less people to do. I think even my in the practice of law, my field, there's a lot of things that can be done much more efficiently. So if you are able to leverage AI, you're going to be able to be very successful in the economy as it's changing. And Canada is making big investments to make sure that we're going to be able to grow that sector in Canada. So there's a the job landscape is changing so significantly, but young people are so well placed because you're going to be growing up in this environment as this technology is rolling out, and it may not be like some people that are closer to the end of their career that are a little stubborn about making changes. That young people will really have a leg up in these spaces, but we have to be there to seize those opportunities, but they're very much there for young people.
Yeah, that was very, very cool. And just hearing your perspective of a lot of the issues that are very important to us. I think specifically talking about the digitization of our modern world is something that's very cool, and often not a lot of people talk about it, especially when it comes to like the biggest problems, but I definitely think it is one of the most pressing concerns, especially for young people like Jason and I. Talking a little bit more about affordability, we obviously know this is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest problems and concern for a lot of people, not only youth, but just general Canadians all around Canada right now. And we know Canada, as you said, has fought so hard to build more houses, whether it be working with municipalities to speed up the process, apartment construction loan programs, the Housing Accelerator Fund, National Housing Plan, and as you said, it is anticipated to get 3.87 million homes by 2031, so a lot of good progress there. So we are wondering if you could explain how these initiatives will help our own constituency, and what are your hopes for the future of housing for Canada?
So back in 2017 we launched what was called the National Housing Strategy, which was the first time the federal government made a significant investment in housing in 30 years. So basically my whole lifetime. That was the first time, and so the main focus of this strategy was on getting more below market housing built, particularly for low-income Canadians. And so a lot of these programs, you mentioned the Apartment Construction Loan Program, the Affordable Housing Fund, these have been operating since 2017, and about $80 billion has been invested through this program. And it's had such a big effect already in our constituency. So there's been over 1,000 below market homes that have been constructed through that alone, just since I was elected in 2019.
Wow.
So there's a big shift happening right now, a lot more below market housing that's coming online that is so critical. But it's not just making sure that we have affordable below market housing. We know we just need to get more housing built generally. And so what the Housing Accelerator Fund is going to do, or what it is doing now, it's working directly with municipalities, helping them remove the barriers that are slowing down housing construction. So speeding up permitting processes, getting rid of some of the red tape that is just duplicative. And that's really key, because we've seen those permitting processes take years when they didn't used to before. But the other challenge is we're still building housing the way we did it 100 years ago. So it's one of these sectors that's been very slow to adapt. And what we're going to have to do is build more homes in a factory setting. So there's actually some great companies that are based in Squamish that are doing this, where they'll prefabricate homes and then they'll go install them on different sites.
That's so cool.
And so it's really exciting to see, and other countries are already doing this. So in Sweden, 80% of the housing that's constructed is actually factory built.
Wow.
So we can do this, but it means that we have to do things differently. But when we're dealing with a crisis like this, that's what we have to do, and that's certainly what our government's committed to doing, because I think there's maybe no bigger challenge that we have as a country right now.
Wow, that's so cool. Just seeing factory-made housing and like countries already using it and how successful they are. That's really cool to see. So yeah, as you mentioned, these are a lot of great initiatives, and hopefully in the future they continue to do great things. So another aspect of your work that we, alongside so many Canadians, have been so inspired by is all the work you do towards the environment and Indigenous populations. And as you mentioned earlier, whether it be your work as an environmental lawyer representing countless Indigenous communities throughout British Columbia, or being the chair of the Standing Committee of Indigenous and Northern Affairs, to your own private members motion, Motion 83, really cracking down and preserving BC old growth forests and launching the Old Growth Nature Fund. In fact, with less than 8% of the most productive big treed old growth forests remaining in BC, I think it's pretty important than ever to really ban the export and production of old growth forests.
And we know that old growth forests are not only really important in terms of the environment, given that they can sequester so much carbon, but also they play a really critical part for a lot of Indigenous communities across Canada. So obviously, we're really, really inspired by this motion, and we're wondering if you can maybe explain sort of this motion's importance in terms of simultaneously advancing reconciliation efforts with a lot of Indigenous communities across Canada, while also helping Canada reach some of its target emission goals in the future.
Yeah, so it's often said that the greatest ally that we have on fighting climate change is actually nature.
Yeah.
And one of the best types of environments of capturing, sequestering carbon are old growth forests. And as you mentioned, there's so few of these forests that are left in Canada, and we are one of the few countries that has this temperate old growth rainforest in the entire world. So it's incredibly valuable from a climate perspective. It's also really important for species at risk that live in them, whether it's the spotted owl, where there's only one left in the wild right now, or the marbled murrelet. There's very small populations of these that need that kind of a habitat. And these massive trees, some of which are over 1,000 years old, are incredibly effective at capturing and sequestering this carbon. But we need to make sure that we're protecting it. And that's what really drove me to propose motion M87 to protect the last remaining old growth forests that we have in BC, because they're also iconic for British Columbians. This is something that British Columbians associate themselves with. I think also as salmon in BC.
Yeah.
But they're under threat, and so what this motion proposes was a number of things. Coming to an agreement with British Columbia and First Nations on nature conservation and launching a fund to protect old growth forests and putting the money behind it. And last November, actually, we finally came to an agreement with BC and with First Nations leadership that will lead to 30% of land in BC being protected by 2030, with a specific focus on old growth forests, where up to 13,000 square kilometers of old growth could be protected. And this is amazing. Like, this is a huge step forward. And since that was announced last November, already we're starting to protect some of the most important old growth areas in BC, like Clayoquot Sound, which was actually what really put a magnifying glass on this problem back during the War of the Woods in the 80s and 90s. So we're now starting to protect this, but it's so important that we do this in partnership with First Nations, because so much, almost all of BC is on overlapping land that's claimed by First Nations, where there was never any treaties that were signed with First Nations. And so by moving forward in partnership, by getting the federal government, the provincial government, and Indigenous leadership working together, we can partner on protecting this. And the other exciting part is we've been able to work closely with the charitable sector. So over $150 million has been committed by the private sector to help in this as well. So it really shows all different parties working together. But the frustrating part is that we're still seeing old growth forests be cut down in British Columbia. So this action can't come urgently enough. And the other thing that the motion puts forward is the banning of old growth logs and wood products made from old growth. Because there's not a lot of different areas that are within the federal jurisdiction, but one that is international trade. And so this motion includes, proposes putting a ban on that export by 2030 or as early as possible. So that we can make sure that we're doing everything that we can from a federal government point of view to conserve these areas, because when you log them, they will never grow back to the way that they are right now, and which means you're losing an important carbon sink, you're destroying really sensitive habitat, you're destroying areas that are really unique in terms of the intrinsic value you have visiting it. So we really need to act urgently. And so this is a really important forcing function, so the provincial government will change their policy around forestry as well.
Yeah, that was really, really interesting. And the idea that it's very, very urgent and we need immediate action now. And it was really cool that everyone and all like different levels of government can work together to really help this important piece of our land. Talking a little bit more on environmental advocacy, we know that another aspect that you're really, really passionate about is ensuring that Canadians are getting the full truth about what companies are doing to the environment and really holding them accountable for what they're actually doing instead of what they say they're doing. And whether it be your constant efforts to fight for justice for communities affected by oil spills, so the Imperial oil spill, or just really addressing greenwashing. And for viewers at home who are unfamiliar with this term, and I'm sure MP Weiler will talk a little bit more about this, but it's essentially where different companies and corporations fake environmental claims to sound more environmentally friendly. And we know on the Standing Committee of Finance, you spearheaded changes to the Competition Act to really force these companies to substantiate the environmental claims with very sound pieces of evidence. So given that this bill, do you think that big oil will be encouraged to act a lot more in an environmentally friendly manner? And now, given that they can no longer greenwash, do you think this can deter a lot of bad consequences such as oil spills or natural disasters due to greenwashing?
So one of the challenges we have in Canada and many other countries in the world is that it's hard to have an honest, fact-based debate about or discussion about the nature of impacts of the extractive sector or other parts of the economy, because what we were seeing was a lot of companies marketing something about their product or about one of the products they have or about their company overall that couldn't be verified.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult from the individual point of view or the consumer point of view to know what's real and what's not. And what ends up happening is it's not only do you end up deceiving customers because everybody wants to purchase a product or support an organization that's doing good.
Yeah.
But if you're not actually doing good, you're basically taking advantage of people's good intentions. And for the companies that are doing good things, it means that you're going through all this extra effort that these other companies aren't, and so it's a competitive disadvantage for you. So it's a very unfair, playing field if you're having that. And so earlier this year, we were at the Finance Committee, we were looking at changes to the Competition Act. And over the course of the last year, we've made more changes to competition law than the previous 2 decades combined.
Wow.
So there's a massive amount of changes that were being made. But when this came to our committee, we were able to look at areas that we hadn't looked at before, and this was one of them. So we opened up the false and misleading advertising parts of the act to really build in this aspect to tackle this harmful practice. And so I put forward an amendment so that now if you're a company that is making a claim about your company overall, you're going to have to, or an environmental claim about your company overall, you're going to have to substantiate it with evidence, but also based on an internationally recognized methodology. Ooh. So what this means is you're going to have to provide evidence, but not by some methodology that you will make up as a company or that industry will say, yeah, this is how we're going to set the methodology so that we can say that we're doing good.
Yeah.
But by setting it as an internationally recognized one, it means that it won't be based on industry and it won't be a change in government that'll have some really weak methodology, but you'll take a standard that's globally recognized. So you'll know that it'll be a ambitious standard. So what's been really interesting is since that act's passed, a lot of companies have actually taken down their advertising.
Yeah, I saw.
So the oil sands companies all put disclaimers on their advertising, and an organization called the Pathways Alliance, which is a consortium of oil sands companies that is proposing to do a carbon capture project, they actually took out all of their online communications. So it really goes to show that now that you have this requirement to be truthful and to be actually providing evidence with your marketing, that they were having to bring in all these changes, which really calls into question how truthful what they were putting out there was before. Because we've all seen it. We've seen on billboards, on buses, liquid natural gas is going to reduce emissions and having a green background. Like that's the classic example of greenwashing, but there's so many other areas in this, and so that's going to particularly tackle it. And so it'll reward good actors, and bad actors will now not be able to put out something that's untruthful. And then it allows us to actually have a really honest debate with what is and what isn't real, which I think is really important in a type of conversation like this that can sometimes be very polarizing. So it's important that it that is based on the facts. But I do want to bring up one other topic you mentioned there before, which is about the Kearl oil sands spills with Imperial, because there is some very recent news. So as part of this investigation of this company, it was found that there was a disastrous oil spill from their tailings facility that was impacting downstream nations. And they did not tell those nations for over a year.
Wow.
And they didn't even tell the federal government either.
Oh, wow.
So they didn't even tell the provincial government. And so this is a huge scandal.
Yeah.
And we called the CEO to the Environment Committee to really testify on the basis of it. And essentially what we found is that they denied any culpability for it, and they said, oh, there was a minor communications issue. And they've also denied that there is impacts to the downstream First Nations. And what we announced just a couple weeks ago is we're funding a cumulative health impact study for those nations, because they're finding that they have very rare forms of cancer that are present in people in extremely high amounts of people. And so we're going to be able to get to the bottom of this, because this is something that I believe is a really clear example of what's called environmental racism, where you have certain racialized groups or certain demographic groups in Canada that don't typically have the same type of political power as others, that get disproportionately impacted by environmental issues. And actually, through the Environment Committee, with a bill that my colleague Elizabeth May put forward, is now that we're developing a national action plan to deal with issues like this, so that we don't see many disadvantaged groups like this get impacted by these projects, and so that we're going to make sure that everyone is treated fairly in Canada, where we have a right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment.
Wow, it's really cool seeing like these vulnerable communities getting represented and really getting justice that they deserve.
At like a federal level.
Yeah, it's really cool. Great. Aside from your political side of things, well, we know that you're also really well known in our local community for being such an avid door knocker, and you're really passionate to actually go to the doors and go to doorsteps to listen to what constituents really have to say. And we know this because we actually had the amazing opportunity to go door knocking with you and see this for ourselves, which was really, really cool. But apart from that, we also know that you love and always are going to community events, meeting constituents on a regular basis, and just being out there in the community interacting with us. So thank you for that. So our question for you is, after all your amazing efforts, hearing the voices of constituents, we're really curious, like, what sort of have you gotten from that, and what are your top priorities for the next parliamentary session? Are there any specific pieces of legislation you're working on or hoping to propose in the next session?
Well, it's one of the great privileges of this work that I get a chance to participate and be a part of so many fun, amazing celebrations happening in the community.
Yeah.
You know, whether that's Lunar New Year events happening in West Vancouver, or Nowruz with the particularly the Persian community here, or whether that's on Canada Day celebrations, or just different little community events that are happening here and there. It's so amazing to see all the fun stuff happening in the community and be able to connect with people where they are. And that's really what door knocking is about as well, because you can very much get stuck in a bubble in Ottawa when you're just having this sometimes inane but always very polarizing debate on topics. Sometimes on issues that really are not the top of mind priorities for people. And so being able to go knock on someone's door and have a conversation, you get a chance to hear what's actually on people's minds. And what I really love about it is that by doing that, you're reaching out to somebody that may not otherwise be thinking about politics or interested in politics. And so you're able to involve them in democracy and get a good understanding of what people actually care about. And so I always really love getting a chance to do that. And what is really kind of solidified for me is that right now, especially, people are really struggling with cost of living.
Yeah.
And so so much of what my work is going to be focused on is doing what I can to tackle that. And so a big challenge of that is what we've already talked about, the housing crisis that we're going through right now. So, making sure that we're doubling down on what we're doing in that space. But also dealing with the challenge of increased grocery prices or gas prices that people are facing. So one of the big priorities for me is working and continuing to build on what we did with the Competition Act changes, so that we can get more competition, so we get lower prices. That's a big part of it, and going after some of the behavior that you're seeing these monopolies or oligopolies start to really solidify. So that's a big priority as well. There's some things that we can't do, but we should be doing everything we can to help people at this point to deal with cost of living, while we continue to deal with some of these longer term issues like fighting climate change and moving forward on reconciliation and otherwise. So. But it's been really striking to me how how this is an issue that is on everybody's minds, and so as a politician, you have the honor of representing and working for people, and so I take that as my marching orders, and that's what I'm going to be working on this fall.
Yeah, great. That sounds so good. Great. So for the next part of our interview, we're going to sort of shift gears a little bit and talk a lot more about youth. So in recent years in Canada, we know, unfortunately, there has been a slight decline in youth engagement in politics, evidenced by, like lower youth voter turnout at polls, or just less youth coming forward to really voice what they really care about. So I guess we have two questions in this regard. So firstly, according to you, in what aspects can youth become more engaged within the political sphere and inject themselves within the political discussion? And secondly, what steps can youth take to really help address or help mitigate some of the really important issues that we just talked about that Canada currently faces?
So I think there's so many ways that young people can get involved in democracy. So even though you're not able to vote until you're 18, there's so many other ways where you can get involved, like just the way that you guys are doing right now, like talking to different whether that's federal representative, provincial or municipal representatives, and making sure the issues that you care about are top of mind for them. It's getting involved in different campaigns that are going on at all different types of elections, putting that on people's minds. It's getting involved with different community groups or nonprofits that are advocating for different things. There's so many ways of bringing your voice to the table, and I'm certainly not alone amongst elected officials, but I find it so compelling when I find young people that are interested in politics and government, because we know that the decisions that are being made today are disproportionately going to affect young people. So housing is a good example. Climate change is another one, like the changing labor market. We need to make sure that our country is going to create the opportunities that young people are going to have, the same opportunities that my generation or my parents' generation had as well. So it's so important that young people get involved. And I know one thing that I really am proud to have is a youth council that is so engaged with folks right across the riding, where if they're interested in government, they can come work with other people that are interested in it as well. And I'm just there to be kind of a tool and support to help advance what their objectives are. So I think it's so important that we get young people involved, and there are so many different opportunities. And even when we're in an election, even if you can't vote, you can influence your parents. You can influence your older friends. And the other thing I'll just mention is my first election in 2019. The absolute best debate that was organized, that I participated in, was one that was organized by youth at West Van Secondary, and it just really, I find it really refreshing to see how involved young people are, because it gives a level of inspiration that we're going to be able to solve some of the really big challenges we have as a country.
Yeah, yeah, that's really, really cool. And following on that, something that Jason and I were just wondering is, in regards to more youth engagement, do you potentially think if we lower the voting age to 16, that will encourage more youth to vote and more youth to be engaged and follow along the everyday politics? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I absolutely think that would help a lot. One of my colleagues, Taylor Bacharach, had put forward a private members motion to do just that, and it's a motion that I supported because like I see young people all the time, people that are between the ages 16 or just about to turn 18,
Yeah.
that are so engaged in politics that I want them to have a voice at the table because I know how much they can contribute right now. And I think it is so important that we get young people involved in democracy because if we don't, then these major issues that are affecting young people are not going to get addressed. You'll have politicians, if politicians know that people from the age of 16 are going to vote, it's going to completely change the type of policy platforms that are going to be coming out. And so I think that's really important. But again, it's not essential. There's so many ways that people can have their voice heard. But I think that one is a really important way that we can change the dynamic because we are seeing increasingly that a lot of young people are not as interested in the democratic process, and that's really concerning because and I get it from the point of view that there are so many challenges that the young people are facing because of all these different issues. But we need to maintain people's faith in our political systems so that we're able to make progress on them. And the more ways we can bring people into the process, have it be more transparent and participatory, I think it's better.
For sure, yeah. I think that's just really cool just to seeing so much support for younger and youth engagement at such a high level of government. Our second to last question before asking one of my favorite questions I've ever had the opportunity of asking anyone. We were wondering if you could give a piece of advice to all young Canadians right now. What would that piece of advice be?
I think that my piece of advice would be don't be afraid to try new things. When I was very young, I sometimes got into some issues that I tried to have too narrow a focus on things like, this is the only thing I could do. And it kind of puts you in a box when you have that kind of narrow focus, but particularly when you're young, but I'd say over your whole life, you never know where it's going to go. The more things you can try, the more places you can visit, the more times you can challenge your viewpoints, the better. Because it will expand your mind. It will test how you feel about sometimes your biases that you have, and sometimes you'll find that by doing something that you may think that you might hate, you actually end up loving it.
Yeah.
And that's certainly been my experience. And so I would just encourage young people to do the same thing. Keep an open mind, try new things, and don't be afraid of failing because that's how you learn.
Wow, yeah, that was really, really cool. And now for the last question. After researching, I knew I had to ask this question. So we know that you were once a DJ. So we're just wondering, did you really have a cool, sick, unique DJ name? How did you get into DJing? And what are some of your favorite songs to DJ?
So I used to DJ. It's been a while, I have to say. I'm gonna date myself. I started DJing when everything was still done on vinyl, and so I've always been very into hip hop music. Particularly the '90s era hip hop music was my absolute favorite. But I have like a particular genre that really interested me, which is kind of the type of hip hop that was coming out of the Bay Area of California. So my favorite song is from Souls of Mischief. It's called 93 Until Infinity, and I have that on record, and I still have all my record collection. But it's been a while since I've played. But I used to DJ under the DJ name Diplopat.
Oh, wait, that's actually pretty good. That's pretty good.
So I actually got this name from one of my sister's friends from high school, from the Seashell Nation, actually. And he always thought I was very easy to get along with and collaborative, and so he called me Diplopat. And that name kind of stuck with me, and so that became my DJ name. And I used to actually DJ on the North Shore.
Wow.
So at a bar called the Linwood, and then also mostly for fun when I was at school in McGill. But primarily I played a lot of hip hop music from the 90s, and I still have the collection, but it's been too long since I've been spinning on the ones and twos, so I'll have to bring it back.
Yeah, wow. Diplopat's a really cool name. Cool. All right, I think that concludes our interview today. Again, Jerry and I would like to extend such a big thank you to MP Weiler for taking the time out of his very busy schedule to come here and meet with us today. But also a special shout out to MP Weiler's phenomenal team. Special shout out to Natasha, Norman, Farshad, as well as Kevin for always supporting us and giving us the support we need. So over the course of this conversation, I know Jerry and I learned so much. We had a blast doing it. I'm sure the viewers will too when this episode comes out. So we really, really appreciate it. For the listeners at home, if you guys wish to see more interviews like this, be sure to tune in to future episodes. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you guys next time.